It was a humid summer night, the kind where the air felt thick and heavy, clinging to your skin like an unwelcome presence. I was 25 at the time, sharing a 3-bedroom house with my best friend, though our friendship had been deteriorating for months. She barely stayed home anymore, choosing instead to crash at her boyfriend's place most nights. That night, however, she was home, sleeping soundly in her room while I lounged on the couch, scrolling through YouTube and taking lazy puffs from my joint. It was my usual routine. I worked late shifts as a server, which meant my nights stretched into the early hours of the morning. I cherished the solitude, the quiet hum of the fan, the glow of my laptop screen. But what I didn't cherish, what had begun to feel like an infestation, were my neighbors. They lived in the small mill house next door, a young couple, always coming around asking for things. Not normal neighborly requests, but weird ones. A cup of water in an old Mountain Dew bottle because their pipes were messed up. A single beer. A literal dollar bill. They'd press their faces to my peephole when I didn't answer the door, stealing cigarette butts from our ashtray, staring inside when they thought no one was looking. And then, of course, there was the boyfriend. That night, just past 11 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I froze, exhaling slowly. I already knew who it was. I could feel it. Peeking through the peephole, I wasn't surprised. There he was, the boyfriend, standing on my porch. But something was different. He wasn't leering or swaying in that strange way he sometimes did. Instead, he looked almost nervous. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, his foot tapping slightly against the wooden floor. I hesitated before unlocking the deadbolt and cracking the door open just an inch. "Hey," he said, breathless. Sorry to bother you this late, but I need a favor." I didn't say anything, just waited. He cleared his throat, rocking back on his heels. I'm proposing to my girlfriend tonight. Got the ring right here. Was wondering if you could film it for me? Just need someone to follow me to the backyard, catch it on video." He patted his pocket, as if to prove the ring was really there. I blinked. Proposal? At 11 p.m.? The whole thing felt wrong. Why ask me? Why not a friend? A family member? The request had come out of nowhere, out of the blue. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I started, forcing a polite smile. "That's sweet, man. Congrats. Let me just grab my shoes real quick." He grinned. Yeah, take your time. I'll wait right here." I closed the door, locked it, and immediately ran to my roommate's room. She was a light sleeper, and sure enough, she groggily sat up when I shook her shoulder. "What?" she muttered. I whispered quickly, my words rushed, barely pausing for breath. "Neighbor, the boyfriend, just knocked. Wants me to film his proposal outside. But there's nothing out there." I checked the window. It's pitch black. No decorations. No candles. No nothing. Her eyes widened slightly. Then, her expression darkened. "That's weird. He's still on the porch," I whispered. Knocking again. We both crept to the front door. The peephole was dark now, completely blocked. My stomach turned. He was pressing his eye right up against it. My roommate bolted back to her room, came out holding 2 wire hangers, our sorry excuse for weapons. She shoved one into my hand. We stood against the door, breath held, listening. Silence. Then, loud, heavy banging. "Come on, just for a second," his muffled voice pleaded. "It'll be quick." Neither of us moved. We just stood there. The banging stopped. We exhaled, our grips on the hangers tight enough to make our knuckles white. Then, after a long, painful minute, we heard footsteps retreating. Relief flooded my body, but it didn't last. A sick curiosity took hold of me. I grabbed my roommate's wrist. "Come on," I whispered. "Let's check the backyard." We slipped out through the back door, creeping along the side of the house, staying low. The night was too still, too quiet. The streetlights flickered in the distance, but the boyfriend's backyard was completely dark. I barely breathed as I peeked through the fence. Nothing. No decorations. No setup. No sign of a proposal at all. But then, movement. My heart stopped. The boyfriend was standing there, facing the tree line, whispering. I squinted, my eyes adjusting. He was not alone. There were 2 others standing with him, men I didn't recognize. One was tall, broad-shouldered. The other, shorter, stockier. They were all talking in low voices, their faces barely illuminated by the moonlight. Then, they turned. We ducked, pressing ourselves against the fence, barely daring to breathe. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving toward our side of the fence. I grabbed my roommate's wrist. Go, now. We ran. We didn't stop running until we were in my car, parked a few blocks away at a gas station. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I called the police. By the time they arrived, the boyfriend and his two friends were gone. The backyard was empty. The house? Dark. No signs of anything. But the next day, something even stranger happened. I came home from work and found a woman, older, maybe in her 50s, standing in their driveway. She approached me before I even had a chance to get inside. "Hey," she said, a deep frown etched into her face. "Do you know where the couple who lived here went?" I stared at her. No. She sighed. "Figures. I'm the owner of this house. They were months late on rent. Came to evict them today, but it looks like they already skipped town." I hesitated. "Skipped town?" She nodded grimly. "Left a mess inside. Holes in the walls. Garbage everywhere. Needles, even." I felt my stomach churn. "Well," she continued, "if you see them again, let me know. Cops are looking for them." I never saw them again, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear knocking. It started the day we moved in. My husband and I had just settled into our newly built townhome. It was part of a fresh development, meaning everyone in the community had moved in at roughly the same time. I liked that. It made it feel like a fresh start, like we were all figuring out this place together. Next door to us lived a single mom and her grown son, probably late 20s, maybe early 30s. They seemed nice enough, quiet, mostly kept to themselves. To the other side of them lived another young married couple, I and P. We became quick friends, bonding over the struggles of home ownership, bad takeout, and long commutes. It was a nice setup, peaceful, at first. Then the son's guest arrived. At first, we didn't think much of it. People had visitors all the time. This guy wasn't particularly memorable, just a man, slightly unkempt, maybe in his 40s. We assumed he was a family member, maybe a cousin or an uncle down on his luck. Then one morning, everything changed. It was early, just after sunrise, and I was stepping out to walk my dog. I wasn't dressed for the day yet, just pajama shorts, an oversized t-shirt, my hair still tangled from sleep. As soon as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I caught the scent of cigarettes. I glanced around, and there he was, the guest, standing on the pavement just outside our townhomes, a cigarette burning between his fingers, watching me. He didn't move, didn't even pretend to be looking elsewhere. He just stood there, staring. I hesitated, feeling my skin crawl, but decided to just keep walking. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then, as I passed him, he smiled and said, "You look really lovely today." I froze. It wasn't the words themselves that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the way he said them, slowly, deliberately, like he was tasting them, like he had been waiting to say them. I forced a polite nod. "Morning. Morning," he echoed. I turned away, walking briskly toward the open grassy lot at the end of our row of townhomes. My dog, oblivious to my unease, trotted happily beside me. Then I heard footsteps. Not heavy, light, measured. I glanced over my shoulder. He was following me. My stomach twisted. I picked up my pace, my heart hammering against my ribs. My dog, normally easygoing, must have sensed something was wrong because she whined, her ears pinning back. I forced myself to act normal. Maybe he was just walking the same way. Maybe I was overreacting. But when I stopped to let my dog sniff a patch of grass, he stopped too. When I moved to another spot, so did he. I gripped my dog's leash tightly, my hands clammy. I needed to go back. Now. But as I turned toward home, so did he. I could feel his eyes on me. Heavy, predatory. I quickened my pace. So did he. Panic surged through me. My house was only a minute away, but it suddenly felt like miles. Then my dog, normally quiet, normally friendly, snarled. A deep, guttural sound I had never heard from her before. The man stopped, just like that. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I yanked my dog's leash and ran. I didn't slow down until I was inside. The door locked behind me. My hands were shaking. I called my husband at work, telling him what happened. He wasn't thrilled. "I don't like that," he muttered. "I don't like that at all. Don't walk her alone for a while, okay?" I agreed. But the next morning, I made a mistake. I let my guard down. I peeked outside, no sign of him. I figured it was safe. I stepped out with my dog, and within seconds, I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. I turned, my heart hammering. He was there again. Silent. Watching. I froze. Then, suddenly, he grinned. "Good morning," he said. My dog lunged, barking furiously. I nearly dropped her leash in surprise. She had never reacted like this before. Not to strangers, not to anything. The man took a step forward. I took a step back. "She's protective," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded. "Smart dog." I gripped the leash tighter. "Well," I forced a tight smile. "Have a good day." Then I turned and walked away. Fast. He followed. Not close enough to be obvious. Not close enough to be threatening. But close enough that I felt it. By the time I reached my front door, my hands were shaking too hard to get the key in the lock. I slammed the door shut behind me. Enough. I called my husband again. "Stay inside," he snapped. "I'll handle it." And he did, but not how I expected. That night, my brother-in-law showed up. He was a big guy, ex-military, known for his short temper and protective streak. He marched straight to our neighbor's door and pounded on it. The guest's mother answered, startled. "Keep your son's friend in check," my brother-in-law growled. "Because if I hear he's bothering my sister-in-law again, there's gonna be a problem." The woman paled. She promised he'd stay away, and for a while he did. But the story doesn't end there. A few weeks later, my friend, I, invited me out for coffee. She looked uneasy. "That guy," she said, "the one who was following you?" I nodded. "What about him?" She hesitated. "He's not just a guest. He's her son." And she swallowed. "He's got a history." "What kind of history?" I asked, my skin prickling. I didn't expect her answer. "He's been kicked out of places before," she whispered. "There was a woman at his last apartment complex who tried to pepper spray him. He grabbed her, punched her in the face, took her keys." I stopped breathing. "He got a restraining order," she continued. "Then his mom moved here. And now, he's here." I felt sick. I told my husband everything. We didn't wait. We packed our bags and moved. A month later, I heard his mother had left too. And the townhome? It sat empty. I've been paranoid about windows for years. I don't change in front of them. I don't sleep with my curtains open, and I always double-check my locks. I think it all started because of what happened when I was 13. At the time, my parents had been divorced for years, so every weekend, my older brother and I stayed at my dad's house. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, single-story mobile home in a quiet neighborhood. It was the kind of place where people minded their business, where everyone knew their neighbors but didn't necessarily trust them. Our weekends there were routine. Wake up, sneak whatever breakfast we could before our stepmom woke up. She was territorial over her kitchen, and then retreat to our rooms. My brother would play Xbox, and I'd watch movies in bed. It was a summer afternoon, the kind where the air outside shimmered with heat. I had just finished watching Live Free or Die Hard, still curled up under my blanket even though the room was warm. That's when my dog, Chester, started growling. Chester was a good dog, loyal, a little lazy, but friendly. He only ever barked when he got excited, like when someone knocked on the door. But this wasn't barking. This was a growl, a deep, unfamiliar sound that made my stomach twist. I looked down from my bed. Chester was on the floor, his ears pinned back, his eyes locked on the window. I froze. The blinds were closed, but my heart started racing anyway. Slowly, I sat up, careful not to make any sudden movements. Then, just as I leaned forward, A shadow moved. It was quick, a flicker of motion just beyond the blinds. A hand pressed against the glass. Fingers splayed. Then another. I felt like I couldn't breathe. For a long, awful second, I thought maybe it was just my reflection. Maybe the light was playing tricks on me. But then a face appeared, and it was smiling. I knew that face. It was our neighbor, an older man who lived 5 houses down. He wasn't friendly, never waved when we saw him outside. I had always gotten a bad vibe from him, but I never had a reason to be afraid. Until now, he was staring straight at me, his grin too wide, his teeth yellowed and uneven. He lifted one hand and gestured, a slow, curling motion, beckoning me. I shot out of bed so fast I nearly tripped over Chester. I backed against the far wall, heart hammering. The air felt too thick, too hot, like the room itself was suffocating me. Then, the window rattled. My breath caught. He was trying to open it. He was sliding his fingers under the edge of the frame, searching for a way in. No! I gasped, my voice cracking. Chester lunged, barking wildly, slamming his paws against the glass. The man's smile vanished. For a long, horrible moment, we just stared at each other. Then he turned and ran. I bolted out of my room, nearly knocking over a chair in my panic. I sprinted down the hall and into my brother's room, slamming the door behind me. "What the hell?" my brother started, but I cut him off. "The window," I gasped. "The neighbor. He was at my window." My brother's face darkened. Without a word, he shoved past me, heading straight for the front door. I grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" He shrugged me off, making sure he's gone. I didn't want to be left alone, so I followed. My hands were shaking, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. We stepped outside. The neighbor's house was dark, his curtains drawn. The street was empty, the air still. But I knew what I had seen, and so did Chester. My brother didn't doubt me, but he didn't know what to do. "If he comes back, we'll call Dad," he said. But maybe he was just drunk or something. I didn't argue. I just wanted to be inside, where the doors were locked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise, the wind, the creak of the house, the hum of the AC, felt too loud. At some point, exhaustion won. I drifted into uneasy sleep. Then, a noise. Soft, deliberate. A tap-tap-tap against the glass. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. The room was dark, but my heart knew. I turned toward the window. The blinds were still closed, but I could see him, a shadow, just beyond the glass. My stomach dropped. The tapping continued, slow, patient. My skin crawled. Chester growled again, but this time, he didn't bark. It was almost like he knew it wouldn't do anything. My mouth was dry. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I wanted to call my dad. I wanted to call anyone. Then, the tapping stopped. A long silence. Then, a whisper. I see you." I nearly screamed. I scrambled off the bed and bolted down the hallway, crashing into my brother's door. "He's back. He's back." He's whispering through my window. My brother, thank God, didn't hesitate. He grabbed his baseball bat and stormed out of the room. But when we burst outside, he was gone. The street was empty. The window? Locked. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there at all. My dad was furious when he found out the next day. He wanted to go over and confront the guy, but our stepmom convinced him it was better to just keep an eye out. But the neighbor never looked at me again. Whenever I saw him outside, he turned away, like he knew I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. And then, one day, he was just gone. No moving truck. No warning. His house, empty. I told myself it was over. But to this day, every time I hear a tap against the window, my stomach clenches. Because I know, somewhere, he's still watching. Moving into my first apartment on my own was supposed to be a fresh start. My space, my rules, my life. I was in my early 20s, finally independent, and ready to enjoy the peace of having my own place. It wasn't anything special, a mid-sized apartment in a quiet, sprawling complex, but it was mine, and that was what mattered. At first, everything was fine. I kept to myself, spent my evenings unwinding with music or a good book, and enjoyed the occasional company of friends. It was a peaceful routine, one that I hadn't even realized I had started to take for granted. Then, I met Mark. Mark was one of those people you don't notice right away. Mid-40s, average height, slightly hunched posture, a little on the thin side. His most notable feature was his dog, a small, anxious-looking mutt that seemed more nervous around him than it should have been. I first noticed him while smoking on my patio in the evenings. The grassy area behind my apartment was a common spot for people to walk their dogs, and Mark was always out there. At first, I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people walk their dogs at night. But then I started noticing patterns. Mark was always there, whether I stepped outside at 7, 9, or even past midnight. He never really approached at first, just lingered in the background, his dog sniffing at the grass while he watched. I ignored it. Maybe he was just a lonely guy. The first time we spoke, it was because of my cat. She loved sitting by the glass patio door, watching the world outside. One evening, Mark's dog ran up to the door, tail wagging, clearly excited. My cat pawed at the glass, mimicking the dog's movements. Mark laughed. Looks like they're making friends. I glanced up, surprised. He was standing just a few feet away from my patio, a friendly smile on his face. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "She's always watching the dogs go by." "You live here alone?" The question came too fast, too casually. My stomach tightened. I wasn't sure why it felt like a trap, but it did. I lied. "No, my boyfriend's inside." His smile didn't falter. If anything, it widened. "Ah, lucky guy." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I nodded quickly, muttered something about needing to go back inside, and locked the patio door behind me. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. I started running into him more often. Too often. At first, it seemed like coincidence. Every time I stepped outside, there he was, dog leash in hand, looking up just in time to make eye contact. He always waved, always smiled. Then came the conversations. "I've got a nice bottle of whiskey inside," he said one evening. "You should come over, have a drink sometime." "I don't really drink," I replied, forcing a polite smile. "Come on, one drink won't kill you." I declined again, and again, and again. Each time, his smile seemed to tighten, like he was trying to hold something back. Then, one night, he brought the wine. I was outside smoking when he appeared, carrying a dark glass bottle and 2 wine glasses. "You have to try this," he said, grinning. "Best wine I've ever had." I didn't want to accept the glass, but refusing felt dangerous. I took it hesitantly. The bottle seal was broken. Yet, the wine level was completely full. Something was wrong. Mark poured himself a glass and lifted it. "Go ahead. Take a sip." I hesitated, pretending to examine the color. "You first." His grin twitched. "Come on," he said lightly. "Ladies first." I brought the glass to my lips, but didn't drink. I tilted it just enough to make it look like I had. I said. "Good." Mark's eyes flicked to my glass. "Another sip." I laughed nervously. "You haven't even touched yours." His fingers tightened around his glass. "I like to pace myself," he said. I nodded, pretending to understand. "Me too." A few moments passed. Every few seconds, he nudged me to drink. Then, finally, he lifted his own glass. Right as he brought it to his lips, he spilled it. The red wine soaked into the grass, disappearing into the dirt. "Shit," he muttered, shaking his head. "I'm clumsy." I forced a nervous laugh. "Guess we both are." His smile froze. For the first time, I saw something behind his expression, something dark. I tilted my own glass and let the wine spill onto the ground. Mark's entire face changed. He laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. "You sure you don't want another glass?" I shook my head, stepping back toward my patio door. I should probably head inside. He watched me. As I turned to go, he said, "I'll see you around." I locked the door the second I got inside. That was the last time I spoke to him, but it wasn't the last time I saw him. I started noticing things. Fingerprints on my patio glass, my doormat slightly shifted, as if someone had stepped on it while I was sleeping. I started getting texts from an unknown number. "You looked cute today. I know you're home. Why are you ignoring me?" One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. There was movement outside my patio. I crept to the glass door, heart pounding. The patio light was off, but the moonlight was enough. Mark was standing there, not moving, just staring. I called the cops. By the time they arrived, he was gone. The next day, I saw him walking his dog near the parking lot. I didn't acknowledge him. I walked past him toward my car. As I reached for the door handle, he muttered something. Low, just loud enough for me to hear. "You should have drank the wine." I moved out the following month. I never saw him again, but even now, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, still watching. The first time I met Emma, I knew something was off. I had just moved into my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a quiet complex. It wasn't anything special, but it was mine, and after years of living with roommates, that was all I cared about. The building itself was old but well-maintained. The kind of place where retirees and college students coexisted in an unspoken agreement to ignore each other. The day after I moved in, I was heading to my car when I saw her. She was thin, almost frail, with deep-set eyes surrounded by dark purple bags. Her skin had that ashen, leathery look that only came from decades of smoking. Her lips were cracked, her hair thin and limp, but it was her smile that unsettled me the most. It was wide, too wide, and something about it made my stomach knot. "Hello, miss," she rasped, her voice wrecked from years of cigarettes. "You must be my new neighbor." I forced a polite smile. "Yeah, just moved in a couple of days ago." Her grin widened, and I noticed something off about her teeth. Some were missing, the remaining ones uneven and rotting. She looked delighted to see me, too delighted, like she had been waiting. "You'll love it here," she said, taking a step closer. "And I want you to meet someone." She pulled something from behind her back, and my stomach dropped. It was a doll, a horrible doll. It was the size of a newborn, with a lumpy, rounded body made of rough fabric. The face was stitched on, the eyes black buttons, the mouth an uneven red thread smile. It looked ancient, like it had been left in a damp basement for years. "This is Jambalaya," she said, stroking the doll's head. I stared. She beamed at me, rocking the doll in her arms like a real baby. Nice to meet her," I said awkwardly, shifting my weight. I had to get to work, but something told me walking away too quickly would be a mistake. Emma's smile twitched. "You have to hold her," she said. I took a step back. "Oh, that's okay." Hold her. The air between us shifted. The light in her eyes went flat, and the pleasant neighborly act cracked. My stomach tightened. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough fabric of the doll's body. It felt wrong, like old skin. Emma giggled. I pulled my hand back immediately. "Sorry, I really have to go." Her grin returned, as if nothing had happened. "Okay, sweetheart," she crooned. "Jambalaya, and I will see you later." I turned and hurried to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Emma was standing in the middle of the road, cradling the doll, watching me leave. For the next few days, I did my best to avoid her. Every time I saw her outside, I either turned the other way or waited inside until she was gone. But she was always there, sometimes standing near the complex entrance, sometimes pacing by the mailboxes, and sometimes just sitting in the parking lot, rocking Jambalaya. She never approached me again, but I knew she was waiting. Then, one evening, as I was pulling into my parking space, I heard something. A soft, rhythmic chant. "Jambalaya, Jambalaya, Jambalaya." I looked toward the sound. Emma was rocking the doll on her lap, whispering its name over and over again. Her eyes closed, her lips moving in slow, deliberate motions. The way she was holding it, it didn't look like a doll anymore. It looked like a corpse. I slammed my car door shut and rushed inside, locking my door behind me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she was just an eccentric old woman with a weird attachment to a doll. Then, everything escalated. It was 4:30 a.m. when I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The apartment was silent. Too silent. Then I heard it. A soft tapping. Not at my door. At my window. My blood ran cold. I turned my head slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The blinds were closed, but I could see a shape. A shadowed figure standing right outside my bedroom window. The tapping continued. Steady. Patient. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then, a whisper. Jambalaya wants to come in. A scream caught in my throat. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. The operator answered, but before I could speak, the front door slammed shut. I nearly dropped the phone. I ran to the living room. The door was unlocked, slightly ajar. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. My stomach churned as I turned toward the bathroom. The shower curtain was closed. I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath, ripped the curtain back, and nearly collapsed. Jambalaya was sitting in the bathtub. Her button eyes stared up at me, her red-stitched mouth frozen in a wide grin. My entire body went numb. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I grabbed the doll and threw it in the trash, then double-checked every lock in my apartment. The next morning, I reported everything to the apartment manager. When they went to confront Emma, she had vanished. Her unit was empty. No furniture, no clothes, no sign of anyone ever living there. Just the doll, sitting in the middle of the floor. The apartment complex called the police, but they couldn't find any records of an Emma ever renting that unit. She was gone, like she had never existed. I moved out 3 days later. I don't know what Emma wanted. I don't know what Jambalaya was. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That soft, rhythmic chanting. Somewhere, in the dark. Jambalaya, Jambalaya, Jambalaya. I was 14 the morning it happened. The air was crisp for an early autumn day, a thin fog clinging to the ground as the sun started to burn through. Our neighborhood was quiet, tucked beside a massive Catholic church, its tall, white stone walls looming over our cul-de-sac like a silent guardian. The streets here were peaceful, mostly filled with older couples and families who had lived in their homes for years. We had only moved in a few months prior, still getting used to the area. It seemed safe. I think that's what made it so terrifying when I realized it wasn't. I was the first one outside that morning, stepping into the driveway while my younger sister, only 12 at the time, tied her shoes inside the yard. Our other siblings were still getting ready. The sun had barely risen, stretching long golden rays over the rooftops. That's when I saw the car. It turned onto our street too fast, its tires rolling over the pavement with a quiet hiss. My stomach twisted almost immediately. Something about the way it moved, the way it slowed as it reached me, felt wrong. The car came to a stop just a few feet away. The driver was a man, late 40s, maybe early 50s. He had sunken cheeks, a thin, bony face with skin stretched tight like he hadn't eaten properly in a while. His hair was greasy, unkempt, hanging in dark strands over his forehead. But his eyes were what unsettled me most. They were too sharp, too aware, like he had been studying me long before I noticed him. He rolled the window down slowly. A plastic grocery bag sat on the passenger seat beside him, its handles tightly twisted around whatever was inside. He grabbed it, lifting it just slightly as he leaned out. "Hey there," he called out, his voice dry and raspy, like he didn't use it much. I didn't move. I'd always been taught not to talk to strangers, but there was something in his tone, something that felt practiced, like he had said this before, many times, to many kids. "You live here, don't you?" I should have ignored him. I should have turned and walked inside. But I froze. It wasn't just a guess, he knew. He knew I lived here. I shifted my weight toward the car as if I were about to get in. I wanted him to think I was leaving, that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't an easy target. The man smirked. He lifted the bag slightly. "I got something for your little brother," he said. "He likes basketball, right?" I felt my stomach drop. We had a basketball hoop in our driveway, one my little brother played with almost every day. How did he know that? I glanced at the bag. It was bulging, the plastic stretched tight, the contents inside indistinct. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice even. The man's smile widened. "A basketball," he said. "Got it special for him." My mouth was dry. If it was just a basketball, why was it in multiple layers of plastic bags? "Come get it," he urged, shaking it slightly. I took a step back. "Just toss it over," I said. My voice came out too casual, like I wasn't standing on the edge of something very, very wrong. The man's grip on the bag tightened. "Nah," he said, his voice lower now. "I want to make sure he gets it." Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. From the corner of my eye, I saw my little sister push open the gate and step outside. The man saw her too. His eyes flicked toward her, his expression shifting from calculated patience to something else, something hungry. I didn't think. I grabbed her wrist and yanked her back inside the gate. "Mom!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. The man's grin vanished. He jerked back into the driver's seat, his door slamming shut. I barely had time to react before the car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement as he sped away. I stood there, shaking, my sister clutching my arm, both of us too stunned to move. My mom rushed outside, her face pale. "What's wrong? What happened?" I told her everything. Her expression darkened. "Get inside," she ordered. She called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, the man was long gone. And the worst part? No one knew who he was. None of the neighbors had seen him before. No one recognized the car. It was like he had appeared just for us. And that bag? That plastic bag with its mystery contents? No one knew what was inside. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching us longer than we realized. He knew about the basketball hoop. He knew my little brother played there. And he had been waiting. But waiting for what? To grab one of us? To get close enough for something worse? I still wonder about that bag. What was in it? A basketball? Or something else? Something meant to lure me closer? Something meant to make one of us disappear? A few months later, a new family moved into the house 2 doors down. They had a 10-year-old son, a quiet kid who loved playing soccer in the front yard. One evening, my mom was in the kitchen when she noticed something through the window. A car, parked at the corner of the street, engine running. Inside, a man, watching the boy. She called the police. By the time they arrived, the car was gone. But I have a feeling I know who it was. Growing up, my cousin Jake and I spent every summer together. Our parents would take turns watching us, switching between his place and mine every few weeks. That summer, we were staying at my house, a small home on the edge of town, where the houses thinned out and gave way to endless stretches of woods. We were both 13, too old for babysitters, but too young to be trusted completely. Most days, we rode our bikes up and down the neighborhood, exploring the back roads and cutting through the woods, searching for anything interesting. We always thought we knew the area well, but one afternoon, we found something we'd never seen before. Something that, to this day, I still can't explain. It was a humid July afternoon when we set off on our bikes, sweat already clinging to our backs. Jake had been nagging me to explore deeper into the woods, convinced there was something cool hidden past the main trails. So, we rode down the back roads until we found an old dirt path leading into the trees, one that didn't look like it had been used in years. The entrance was almost completely hidden by overgrown bushes, the trail itself littered with fallen branches and tangled roots. "This is perfect," Jake said, grinning. I wasn't convinced, but I followed him anyway. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The sounds of the neighborhood faded behind us. No distant lawnmowers, no passing cars, no barking dogs. Just the occasional rustle of leaves and the steady crunch of our bike tires on the dirt. After what felt like 20 minutes, we saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A house stood in the middle of a small clearing, surrounded by tall grass and wild overgrowth. It wasn't a normal house. It looked old, far older than anything else in our neighborhood, too old to still be standing. The wooden walls were dark with rot, the windows thick with grime, the roof half collapsed. The porch sagged, the front steps barely clinging together. But the strangest part? It didn't look abandoned. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt, leading straight to the front of the house. A mailbox, rusty, but still standing. had a newspaper sitting on top, the pages only slightly yellowed. And the front door was open, just a crack. Jake skidded to a stop beside me. "You ever seen this place before?" he asked. I shook my head. We had been through these woods a dozen times, but we had never seen this house. It shouldn't have been here. Jake grinned. "Let's check it out." "Are you insane?" I hissed. "What if someone lives there?" "Then we leave," he said, already hopping off his bike. "Come on, aren't you curious?" "No," but I followed him anyway. We crept closer, stepping carefully through the overgrown grass. As we reached the porch, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The front door handle was rusted, flaking apart, but the door itself looked new. The wood wasn't as rotten as the rest of the house. The hinges weren't caked with rust. It was like someone had replaced the door recently, while the rest of the house continued to decay. Jake reached for the handle. The door swung open before he could touch it. We both froze. A rush of cool air swept past us from inside, carrying a scent that made my stomach turn. It wasn't dust. It wasn't mildew. It was something else. Something rotting. Jake swallowed hard. "Smells like something died in there." I took a step back. "We should go." Jake hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, okay." As we turned to leave, something moved inside the house. A shadow flickered past the doorway. Something big. We ran. We jumped on our bikes and pedaled faster than we ever had before, the air burning in our lungs. We didn't stop until we burst out of the woods, our neighborhood finally in sight. Neither of us spoke. We didn't tell anyone. Not our parents, not our friends. I think we both knew how it would sound. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow, that rotting door, the cool air, the feeling that we had almost seen something we weren't supposed to. The next day, we went back. We had to. We had to prove it was real. We rode our bikes to the same spot, found the same hidden path, and followed it back into the woods. Only, the house was gone. The clearing was still there, but the grass was undisturbed. No tire tracks, no newspaper, no house. It was like it had never existed. Jake swore we had the wrong spot, but I knew we didn't. We searched for hours, checking every possible path, but the house was gone. We never found it again. Years later, I went back. I was 19, home from college for the summer, and I found myself thinking about that house more than ever. I convinced myself it had been a dream, some strange shared hallucination between two overactive kids, but I still had to check. I followed the same roads, found the same hidden path, and when I stepped into the clearing, it was still empty. No house, no ruins, no sign anything had ever been there. But there was something new, something that hadn't been there before. A mailbox. The same rusted mailbox we had seen years ago, standing alone in the grass. I walked toward it, my hands shaking. There was something inside. A newspaper. I pulled it out slowly, my heart pounding. The date on the front page? July 12, 2009. The exact day Jake and I had first seen the house. I dropped the paper and ran. I haven't been back since. I don't think I ever will. When my husband and I moved into our new neighborhood, we thought we had finally found home. It was a small, quiet community with well-maintained houses, friendly-looking neighbors, and plenty of families. A safe place to start our life together. Or at least, that's what we thought. We had barely been there a month before we realized something was wrong. And it all started with the man next door. His name was Gary Whitman, and he was the head of our neighborhood's homeowners association. From the moment we arrived, he made himself known. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said the day we moved in, standing in our driveway with a forced smile. His teeth were too white, his handshake too firm, like he had practiced both in a mirror. "I run things around here, so if you ever need anything at all, you just let me know." At first, he seemed harmless. A little overbearing, maybe, but nothing out of the ordinary. But then, we started noticing things. Like how he was always outside. Not just once or twice a day, all the time. Mornings, afternoons, late at night. No matter when I left the house, I would see him somewhere. Standing at the edge of his driveway, leaning against his car, pacing near the community mailboxes. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, until I realized he was watching. Not just us, everyone. One afternoon, I was out walking my dog when I saw him standing by the playground. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, his head slightly tilted as he watched the children play. Not just casually, not in the way a neighbor might glance at kids running around. He was studying them. His gaze followed their movements, his eyes darting between them like he was memorizing details. I stopped mid-step, my breath catching in my throat. Then, as if sensing my stare, he turned to look at me and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was something else, something that made my stomach twist. I yanked my dog's leash and hurried home, telling myself I was overreacting. But then the recording started. It was a Saturday morning when my neighbor, Claire, knocked on my door. Her face was pale, her expression tight with anger. "You have a flash drive?" she asked. Confused, I nodded and grabbed one from my desk. She handed me her laptop. "You need to see this." I plugged the drive in and clicked on the first video file. It was surveillance footage of the neighborhood from hidden cameras. The first video showed the community pool, the camera placed at an angle that shouldn't exist, high up, wedged between the wooden slats of the pool's fence. It captured everything. Families lounging, kids running through the water, women sunbathing. Another file showed the mailboxes. People coming and going, completely unaware they were being recorded. Then there was my house. A video from my front yard. It showed me, standing in my driveway, talking to my husband. The timestamp? 2 days ago. I nearly dropped the laptop. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. Claire's hands were clenched into fists. "I found a camera outside my house," she said. "So I started checking around the neighborhood. A bunch of us did." My throat went dry. "What do you mean, a bunch of us?" Claire exhaled shakily. "We found 12 cameras, hidden in fences, tucked into bushes, disguised as birdhouses. And guess whose house they're all pointing at?" I didn't have to ask. Gary. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those videos. Me, my husband, my neighbors, being watched, recorded, studied. The next morning, I decided to confront him. I found him in his usual spot, standing at the end of his driveway, pretending to check his phone. As soon as I stepped outside, his eyes flicked toward me, like he had been waiting. I marched straight up to him, my pulse hammering. "Why are there cameras all over the neighborhood?" I demanded. For the briefest second, his expression flickered. Then, he smiled. "Neighborhood security," he said smoothly. "You'd be surprised how many people try to vandalize things around here." I felt sick. "You're watching kids," I snapped. "You're watching people in their own yards." His smile didn't falter. "If people aren't doing anything wrong, they have nothing to worry about." My skin crawled. "Take them down," I said, barely restraining my anger. Gary tilted his head, like he was studying me. Then he took a step closer. "You should be careful," he murmured. "This is a nice neighborhood. But nice neighborhoods have a way of changing when the wrong people start making trouble." I took a step back. He smiled wider. "Have a good day," he said, turning away. I ran inside and locked the door. That night, my husband and I made a decision. We weren't going to let this go. We gathered the other neighbors, showed them the footage, and called an emergency HOA meeting. Gary didn't show up. But later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a block number. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Then, a voicemail. A single sentence. "I see you." The police got involved. They searched Gary's house and found more than just cameras. Hard drives. Flash drives. Dozens of them. Full of videos. Full of us. The police took him in, but in the end, the charges didn't stick. Something about lack of intent, about how none of the videos showed anything illegal. He moved out 2 months later. We thought we were finally safe. Until, one evening, Claire called me. Her voice was shaking. "Go check your mailbox," she whispered. Dread pooled in my stomach as I stepped outside. A single flash drive sat inside. No name, no return address. I plugged it into my laptop, my hands trembling. There was only one file. A video of me, standing in my bedroom window. From the outside, watching, waiting. I slammed the laptop shut. Gary was gone, but someone else was still watching.